Good evening, all. I realized that when I was going over rather, my reviews of 1970s dystopian science fiction movies, I made a major omission. I never did a review of Logan's Run from 1976, which is one of my absolute favorites to this day. And I really liked it. I saw it in the theater when it first came out, and I was really impressed with it. Some people thought it was kind of silly, and I can understand from certain perspectives that it was a little bit, but certain aspects were kind of derivative of Planet of the Apes. But it was still original enough that it won an award for special effect, an Academy Award for special effects that year, and it won all six Saturn Awards that year. It was nominated for both a Nebula for the best screenplay and the Hugo for best direction. It did not win, but it was nominated in those categories. Anyway, it was like I said, Logan's Run came out in 1976, based on a 1967 novel by William F. Nolan and George Clayton Johnson, two top names in science fiction. And it stars Michael York as Logan 5, Jenny Agutter as Jessica 6, Richard Jordan as Francis 7, um, Roscoe Lee Brown as Box, Farrah Fawcett Majors as Holly, and Peter Ustinov as just the character is called the Old Man. And the screenplay was written by David Zelig Goodman, directed by Michael Anderson. Um, this film had been in development for a long time. A lot of people tried to develop it more directly from the novel, and they found that it was difficult to do. The principal differences are in the novel. It's similar in that it's set in a dystopian future where there's a somewhat hedonistic, youth worshiping culture, but everyone has to die at 21. And to do this, they're supposed to report on their 21st birthday to a quote unquote deep sleep shop and be put to death by a pleasure inducing gas. If they don't comply with this, if they do not report to the deep sleep shop, they become what's known as a runner. And these sandmen, quote unquote, who are these futuristic police, are tracked. It's their job to track down and terminate runners. And they have a gun that has various different settings, which one of them sets all your nerves on edge, and another one like destroys you from the inside. All the settings are rather horrific. Um, they changed that in the movie. For one thing, they thought that if they left the age at 21, they wouldn't have enough young actors who would have enough experience to really be able to carry off the roles. So they increased the age to 30, and that way they could bring in people like Michael York and Jenny Agutter, who were, I believe, actually in their like mid-20s when this was shot. And they created the idea of something called Last Day and the device called Carousel, which is spelled Carrousel. That's not the usual spelling, but since this is science fiction, we can assume that second R has some sort of meaning. Um, and what they do is on last day, you're supposed to report to Carousel, which is a big spinning disc that, using a column of air, spins you up into the air, and then you're shot in the chest with a laser and killed in hope of quote unquote renewal, that you will be reborn. And anyone who has a blinking, they have these life clocks, which are embedded, crystals embedded in their palm, and they go through different phases. At first, I think from 0 to 5 years old, the life clock is clear. Then from 5 years old to 10 years old, the life clock is yellow. From 11 years old to, I believe, 21 years old, it's green. And then from 22 to 30, it's red. And when you're nearing the last day, the day that you're supposed to be terminated on your 30th birthday, the red begins to flash and you become a blinking red, and that indicates that you're supposed to go to Carousel shortly. And they announced through the city is this dome. The people live in this domed city after a series of wars and/or environmental disasters, and the city is run by a computer, and the computer announces who is supposed to report to Carousel. Um, and again, if you don't report to Carousel, then you're terminated by these sandmen who wear black uniforms with a gray stripe across the chest. Everyone else is in very colorful attire. It's a hedonistic society. There's sort of free sexuality, and drugs or drug use is not frowned upon, and people can basically they can overeat, do whatever they want, indulge in their vices, and nobody is going to bother them. The only thing is that you have to die at 30. Well, Logan and his compatriot Sandman Francis are at Carousel watching one of these rituals when they are alerted that there's a runner in the plaza, and it's an area outside of the Carousel Theater, and they go out and they find the runner, and they're kind of playing with him and like torturing him and firing shots at him. One of the cool things about this movie is that the Sandman guns actually worked, and I'll have to explain that. No, they didn't work as in being actual laser guns. They were not. They functioned because they would put a gel pack of green gel at the end and then fire a charge of carbon dioxide through the gel pack, which would ignite. And that actually created these bursts of green light. Apparently, there were some dangers to that, and Michael York almost got burned when one of these things went off a little too close to him. But it made for very good special effects. So they're torturing him, they're firing shots, missing him deliberately, like shooting at his shoulders and his feet. And finally, Francis shoots him off the balcony of the carousel, of the plaza rather, where he was hiding. And they send a disposal unit which just hovers over him and sprays him with something. And he just dissolves, which that was kind of gross when I first saw the special effect, but it was very well done. And it doesn't leave anything. There's nothing left behind. There's not even ashes. Um, Logan reports with the runner's effects to the computer room and speaks to the control computer. And uh, amongst the effects is a strange necklace that he was wearing, and it's he doesn't know what it is. And later on, he goes back to his uh, apartment, and which is rather fancy because apparently Sandman got some sort of special privileges, and he's going through something called "quote unquote" the circuit. What the circuit is like a kind of like a dial-a-porn thing. You can type in an address, and someone will actually physically materialize, and you can have sex with that person. Uh, and again, there's no consequences. There's no, people apparently can't get pregnant. Um, and first, a guy appears, and he says, "No, I'm not interested." And then the next person who appears is Jessica, played by Jenny Agutter, and she says that she put herself out on the circuit by mistake, and he's like trying to make an advance on her, and she kind of rebuffs him. And he doesn't understand. He notices she's wearing the same necklace that the runner was wearing, and he says, "What is that?" She says, "I don't know. It's just something somebody gave me." And then she kind of goes away before he can ask any questions. Francis comes in with a couple of kind of floozy type girls, and they, quote unquote, skull out. They have this red smoke that's apparently hallucinogenic, and they're like freaking out, and they have sex with these girls. It isn't shown; it's just implied. And then later, Logan is summoned to the computer room again, and the computer says, "Logan 5, do you identify this object?" And it shows him the necklace, and he says, "No." And the computer has a female voice, by the way, which is kind of sexy. And that was done by, give me a second here. I know the computer voice was done by Lara Lindsay, who also played a female runner who Logan is supposed to terminate in a very rough area called uh, Cathedral, but he doesn't. He lets her go away. He lets her go, and that is to prove to Jessica that what he says is true. I'm getting ahead of the story here. He goes to the computer, and the computer asks him, "Do you identify this symbol?" And he says, "No." And the computer says, "This is the name of the symbol." It says, "Ankh." He says, "Do you identify this word, Ankh?" And he says, "No." She says, "Do you identify this word, sanctuary?" And he says, "No." She says, "This symbol, Ankh, has been identified with this word, sanctuary." And he says, "What does that mean?" And the computer says, "Sanctuary has been identified with unaccounted for runners." And he says, "How many?" She puts up a symbol and says, 1,065. She says, 1,065 runners are unaccounted for? Well, maybe they're renewed on carousel. Peter doesn't answer him. He says, nobody, no one reviewed, none of them renewed. And she says, I want you to identify this symbol, Ankh, and I want you to pretend to be a runner, and I want you to locate and destroy Sanctuary, whatever it is. And he says, okay, but I'm only a red 4. I'm only 26. How can I pretend I'm nearing last day? She says, procedure retrogram, please identify. And identify means to place your life clock on this reader in the computer, which they do every time they turn over the effects of a terminated runner. So he does this, he identifies, and it says procedure retrogram. And you hear this noise. The soundtrack to this was done by the great Jerry Goldsmith, by the way, and it's very haunting and very, very good. And all of a sudden, when he takes his hand out of the computer, his life clock is now flashing red. And he says, but what about my remaining 4 years? I'm only 26. Do I get my 4 years back? The computer won't answer him. And she says, you've been given your assignment. Please go and, you go fulfill it. So in order to find out, what's going on and what Sanctuary is, and to identify, these runners who seem to have some sort of organization, he contacts Jessica again. And she said, what did you want, me for? You could, you're a Sandman. You could have any woman in the city. And she said, don't tell me, I'm the most beautiful woman you've ever met and you had to have me. And he says, yes, she doesn't believe him. And he says, look, and he shows her his life clock, which is blinking. He says, I want to run. She says, but you're a Sandman. Sandmen don't run. He says, that was before. That was other people's lives. Now it's my life. I don't want to, die at 30. I want to live. And she doesn't really believe him at first, but she says, all right, I'm going to talk to my friends. And he shows her the Ankh that he took off the dead runner. And she says, where did you get that? And he tells her. And she says, okay, I'm going to contact some of my people, and you come down to, the plaza at 8 o'clock, and I'll meet with you, and we'll see. She's not guaranteeing him anything. Oh, they noticed when they terminated the runner in outside Carousel that his face had been changed, and his face had been changed at a plastic surgery shop called New 483. And this apparently is common in this society. You can have your face changed. And so Logan goes to New 483 and is kind of trying to question some people. And he doesn't really get a solid answer, so he's going to come back later. He goes down to meet Jessica, and you realize there are these people there that are waiting they're going to strangle him. They have like a garrote wire, and they're going to kill him. And something happens that there's another runner at a spot, and he and Francis have to track down this runner. That's, I think, when they say that this runner is in Cathedral. Cathedral is a wild area where they have these wild children, who they refer to as cubs, and nobody is allowed in there except Sandmen because it's very dangerous. Cubs are very dangerous. They kill people. They're like gangs of murderous, preteens basically, and Logan takes Jessica with him to track down this runner in Cathedral. He asks the computer to open the doors for him, which it does because, again, he's a Sandman. He has authorization. And they track down the runner, who is this person, Laura Lindsay, and Logan doesn't kill her. But unbeknownst to him, Francis has followed them, and Francis does kill her, and he has seen that Logan let the runner go. So now he's sort of in on it. There's some interesting things between. I'm not going to tell you the entire plot because it's interesting. You should watch it if you haven't. There's some interesting things with the Cubs, which I won't go into detail. He goes back to the city, takes Jessica with him, and she admits to him when they get to the city, when you were coming to meet me before, and he says, yes. She says, you were coming to be killed. And now I believe you when I saw you let that runner go. So now she really believes that he's going to run. And she says, I'll help you. And they go to New 483 rather. And there's a guy named Doc who is played by the director, Richard Anderson's son, Richard Anderson Jr., is this plastic surgeon, and he says, "I'd like a face change." And his assistant is Farrah Fawcett, and our whose character's name is Holly, Holly 13, right? And she says, "I'd like dark hair," and he's like telling him, "What do you want? You want something special?" He says, "No, no, I don't really want anything special." And Holly whispers to him, "Dark hair." She says, "Oh, Holly would like dark hair." He says, "Okay." And then he's showing him how the laser works, and he gets a phone call. The plastic surgery machine rather works, and it like cuts his cheek, and then it instantly cauterizes it. And so you see, there's instant healing. And he gets a phone call, and he says, "I understand." Puts down the laser, seals Logan inside the chamber with the face sculpting laser, and switches it from manual to automatic, from anodyne to heterodyne, and the lasers start firing at random. And now he's turned off the healing factor, and uh, Jessica sees that she's fighting with Holly, and he's fighting with Doc, who has a weapon that destroys his Sandman gun, or knocks his Sandman gun out of his hand. And they're fighting, and he pushes Doc onto the table, and the laser starts slicing him to pieces. And he leaves him in there and runs out the back of this new U-486. He and Jessica, leaving Holly very distraught. He and Francis is now coming after them as well. He and Jessica escape through this thing called the Love Shop, which is basically a sex shop, and there's a secret door that it opens when Jessica uses the Ankh symbol and closes behind them. Um, they go and they descend a staircase, and all of a sudden, these like uh, people are surrounding them with these kind of spears that have like glowing tips and spray hot gas at them, which burns Logan's face. And says, "What are you doing here, Sandman?" And they're trying to. Jessica's telling these people that he's running, that he's not an ordinary Sandman, and that they should let him go. And they don't believe him. They say, Sandman never run. It's a trap, and they're going to kill him. And then at the last minute, Holly shows up. Holly's all torn up now, and um, she's telling them that's the one. That's the one who killed Doc. And now they're really, upset with him, and they're really going to get rid of him. And then Jessica says, "Don't you remember? Don't you remember the other Sandman who was hunting this one, and that this one is running?" And she doesn't remember at first, but then eventually, and this is kind of some bad acting on Farrah's part, but this is one of her first roles, so and you can't really blame her much. And also, the script is not terrific. She says, "Oh, that's right, that's right. The other one, he was hunting him, and he was running." And so now they let them go, and they vote to let him go, and they go on. The Sandmen come. Francis is saying, "I saw you let go of that runner, and turn yourself in." And he's trying to catch him, and he's firing at him. And uh, Jessica presses her Ankh up to this key, and the key opens a door that's hidden. Logan stumbles and drops the key that he took from the runner into this little pool. It's before the opening door, and they escape. A voice says, you know, "Go down. Always follow the path. Always the path is always down." And so they're running. They're running on it. Meanwhile, Francis finds the key that Logan dropped, the Ankh that Logan dropped, and picks it up, and he's able to access to break the city seals and go where they're going. They go past these big, like, fish tanks and some sort of thing about, organic farming. They're not sure what they're doing, and there's like big beds of kelp in these big water tanks, and they're going down and down and down through this like industrial area. Francis catches up when he fires at one of the tanks, and the water all bursts out, and they like go rushing down this sort of a slide, and uh, he loses them. They end up in a very strange kind of cold area where there's all this ice, and there are these ice sculptures. There's a whole ceiling full of sculpted birds, and there's like sculpted penguins and things. And they meet this very strange robot called Box, who is played by the wonderful Roscoe Lee Brown. And uh, he's he tells them that Logan asks them about, have you seen other people like us? And he's, "Yes, all preserved, all ready, all fresh as harvest day." And he says, "What?" And he says, I'll show you. And he shows him this row upon row upon row of naked frozen people. Fox was meant to preserve sea life and plankton and things. But when that ran out, and he says the others came, and the others were the runners, he preserved them as well. There's a scene that's often cut, and this explains something that happens when they first enter this area. They're wet and they're shivering because they got soaked with seawater when Francis shot the fish tank. And Logan says, Let's get these freezing things off." And they find some furs and they put the furs on and take their clothes off. In the next scene, you see when they're talking to Box, their clothes are back on. And that's because there's a cut scene, which I think was thought about as too risque for 1976. Would have given them an R rating, and they wanted to keep it PG-13. So they cut that scene. In that scene, Box sculpts them naked and makes an ice sculpture of them. And then their clothes are now dry, and they put them back on. So that's where that scene jumps, and why it doesn't seem to make sense that they're in furs and then they're back in their own clothes. So that explains that gap. They get into a fight. They don't want to be frozen by Box, so they're fighting him, and they destroy his birds. He's screaming, "My birds, my birds!" And you don't know if Box is actually destroyed because he's not human. He's not really a robot. He's kind of a combination of both. But the ceiling collapses, and that's kind of the last we see of him. Then they continue on and eventually end up outside, uh, in the ruins of what turns out to be Washington, D.C. And we don't realize this until we see them wading across a pool of water, and it's the reflecting pond of the Washington Monument. The Washington Monument has collapsed, but we see that they're walking through the overgrown, weed-clogged reflecting pond. They see the Lincoln Memorial, and Logan says, "I've never seen a face like that." And he says, "That must be the look of getting old." And that seems like a corny line now, but at the time it was actually kind of interesting because they've never seen an old person, never seen anybody over 30. So they'd never seen anyone with lines in their face like President Lincoln. So they go on, and they enter Congress. And living inside Congress is Peter Ustinov as this old man who we never learn his name. He never tells us his name. But he has all these cats, and he's quoting from T.S. Eliot's Old Possum's Practical Book of Cats, and recites some of the poems in there. And they say, "What are these things?" "They're cats." He says, "Cats? Cats." And they're petting them, and they're looking at the portraits of the old senators and former presidents, things that are around. And they ask him to explain. Jessica says, "Do those lines in your face hurt?" And he says, "Oh no." And she says, "Can I touch them?" He says, "Yes." And she touches them, and he laughs. And he's trying to explain who he is and how he got there. That tells him that he grew up there with his parents. And they say, "Parents? What are parents?" He says, "A mom and a dad." And they're saying, "You mean the people who bore you stayed with you your whole life and raised you?" And he says, "Yes." And he says, that's the way things were done. And he doesn't really have a lot of in-depth knowledge of anything, but he shows them the cats and books and things, and they're kind of just looking around. And he says, "One of these portraits has my original hair colors. Theirs all white now." And they're looking through them, and then Francis shows up. One thing Logan has noticed is that his life clock has gone clear, and he realizes that outside the influence of the city, the life clocks don't function. So he's starting to formulate the idea maybe people don't have to, and from talking to the old man, maybe people don't have to die at 30. You can continue to live as long as you're not being influenced by the city and its computer, which controls the life clocks. In the book, they're called palm flowers, but it's pretty much the same thing. And I think in the book there was a blue color, which there isn't in this. But Francis shows up, and he's still trying to get Logan and Jessica, and they get into a fight, and they're they're using whatever they can. His gun won't work, anymore again because it's outside, and or Logan knocks it away, I think, and then they're fighting with what's ironically is a flagpole, and Logan hits Francis a couple of times, and he's fighting back with like a broken chair leg and various other things, and eventually he hits him a blow to the skull and basically crushes his skull, and he dies. Last thing he says, he looks at Logan's hand where the life clock has gone clear, and he says, "Logan, you're renewed," and then he dies, and then they realize at that point that they have to go back to the city, and the old man is saying, "Can I come with you?" And Logan says, "I don't think you could make it. We have to swim back." And they go back to this, what's actually the Fort Worth Water Park, uh, which is kind of an artistic-looking waterfall, which is also used in the PBS production of Ursula K. Le Guin's The Lathe of Heaven, which I discussed earlier in an earlier video. But it was used here first, I think. And so they dive back into the water park and go back into the city, and they're warning people. Logan's yelling, "It's a lie. Life clock is a lie. You don't have to die at 30," as people are going into another session of Carousel. And they won't believe him. And he and Jessica are both arrested by Sandmen, and Logan is extensively interrogated by the computer, who's saying, "Did you find sanctuary?" And he says, "There is no sanctuary." And then it begins what's called a quote-unquote surrogation. And this is interesting, is one of the first use of holograms. They have a hologram of Logan's head, which is revolving around in first one, and then two, and then three, and then finally four cylinders. I saw those actual holograms at the Museum of Holography in New York City in the mid-1980s, and they're really cool. Primitive by today's standards, but very futuristic at the time, and the effect comes off well. Well, the computer won't accept that there's no sanctuary and keeps asking him the question over and over again. And because he keeps saying there is no sanctuary and that all the runners are frozen, he's telling the truth, but the computer doesn't want to hear the truth. And eventually it kind of malfunctions and explodes. And then everybody is free to leave the city, which they do as the city starts to explode because the computer controlled everything. They leave the city and they go out through the water park and they meet the old man. And they're kind of curious. One interesting note, the quote-unquote shy girl who is wearing a red or a pink dress. There are various shades of all these colors, and they're not like one solid color. They have like light pinks and dark pinks, dark reds, lighter reds, and the same with the greens and the yellows. This girl in kind of a pinkish red dress goes up to Peter Ustinov and just touches his beard, and then she smiles, and then the others start coming up and touching him. She's credited as quote-unquote shy girl. Her name was Ashley Coxwell. Apparently she wasn't that shy because she became a Playboy Playmate the next year. So that was kind of an interesting side note. As I said, won multiple Saturn Awards, won Best Picture, Best Cinematography, Best Set Dresser, Best Costumes, and Best Makeup, and Best Special Effects. So basically swept the Saturns for movies that year. And won that special effects Academy Award as well. At the time, it was not terribly well reviewed by critics. They said that it was silly and there wasn't a lot of substance to it, and it came off as just kind of like a fun adventure, but that there wasn't a lot of depth to it. Well, it's been reappraised since then. I think there really was quite a bit of depth. It addresses some interesting issues which were integral to 1970s dystopian science fiction movies like overpopulation, youth culture, overconsumerism, hedonism, the idea that things are disposable, and the disposable society, and those things are addressed, and of course ageism as well was addressed in this movie far before those things became really popular fodder for media. I think it was very well ahead of its time, and it really is one of the best of the 1970s dystopian science fiction movies. Second on my list, only second to Rollerball, which I just particularly love, and I discussed that in my video on Rollerball. So now my review of 1970s dystopian science fiction movies is complete. Run, runner.